Welcome to the Leadership in Law podcast with host Marilyn Jenkins. Cut through the noise, get actionable insights and inspiring stories delivered straight to your ears. Your ultimate podcast for navigating the ever-changing world of law firm ownership. In each episode, we dive deep into the critical topics that matter most to you, from unlocking explosive growth to building a thriving team. We connect you with successful firm leaders and industry experts who share their proven strategies and hard-won wisdom. So, whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey as a law firm owner, the Leadership in Law podcast is here to equip you with the knowledge and tools you need to build a successful and fulfilling legal practice.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership in Law podcast. I'm your host, Marilyn Jenkins. Please join me in welcoming my guest, Lexlee Overton, to the show today. Lexlee is a 30-year veteran of the legal industry who has transformed her career from being a successful trial lawyer into a sought-after leadership and team performance coach. Today, she's a trusted peak performance expert working with thousands of attorneys and law firms nationwide. She's created a holistic, results-driven approach that blends science-backed mindfulness practices, emotional intelligence, and strategic leadership principles. Her signature coaching method empowers lawyers to excel in their careers in every aspect of their lives. She teaches lawyers how to manage stress, maximize productivity, and confidently lead, ultimately transforming law firms into high-performance teams that thrive under pressure. Whether you're a solo practitioner or managing a large law firm, Lexlee's powerful message resonates. With intention, anything is possible. I love that. I'm excited to have you here, Lexlee. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So what made you transition from being a trial lawyer to being a coach and helping people perform better?
It was sort of a natural transition that I didn't even realize was happening. But I started as a young trial lawyer when I was about 30 years old. I walked out of a courtroom in northern Louisiana after a motion hearing and thought I was having a heart attack. And went to the emergency room, and they actually thought I was too. It was a whole ordeal. But ends up that I ended up doing all this kind of testing and everything. And they're like, what's happening is your esophagus is contracting down and you need to take some medication for this. And I was like, this is insane. What's happening is that I am full throttled in a profession that is very stressful with a lot of anxiety because of the adversarial pressure. And I had a young child at the time, I think who was like 3 years old. And I was like, I don't want to be on medication for the rest of my life just to figure out how to survive in this. I want to know how to thrive. And so it set me on a path, literally 25 years ago, of studying how do we manage our state and emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and all the things to be better performing. And I built that into my practice over the next 15 years. And then what happened was I was just teaching in some national trial where I was teaching trial skills, and lawyers started coming to me and saying, we love the trial skill part, but what's that little bit of magic that you seem to have about knowing how to manage everything and your presence and all of that? And it just opened up the opportunity for me to start doing coaching one-on-one with people that then blew up into, well, if I'm working with leaders, why am I not teaching their people, their team, how to be high performing? So I decided over a 3 years process to start to close my practice. This is about 10 years ago, and build this business because it was where my heart was, or his passion was. So much fulfillment and helping people to be healthier and happier in what they're doing.
Well, I absolutely agree. Just to see the transition and the light bulb moment whenever someone's like, right, I can have what I want and be happy with it.
Yes. And, it's not something, we all know that in the legal profession, there's a different type of pressure that happens. And we know the statistics say that we're 4 times as likely to be depressed and twice as likely to abuse substances like alcohol. They're the higher suicide rate in our profession. And that's a little scary. And, the American Bar Association realized that and really dived in 2016 and really made what they call, quote unquote, well-being a very strong factor that law firms should be looking at. But really, if we, besides the fact that that's just terrible, those are the statistics of where we are because of the nature of the practice. Besides that is the idea that if we are not performing well, then that affects the bottom line, right? So for
Sure.
us in our businesses as a law firm, if you're a law firm owner, but all of your team members, it really affects performance, and performance is productivity, and productivity affects profitability. So looking at it, not just because of we should be, and I think as leaders, we should be inspiring greatness in others. And that I think as leaders, we should be talking about that means how are you doing, and teaching people how to perform well. It has a lot to do with teaching them to manage their energy, and energy is about managing emotions.
And that leads us into leading with emotional intelligence, I think is something that is missing in a lot of environments. So
Yes.
that,
Yes. And when I talk, I think about my own path and not knowing how to manage all this when I came in. And then, we're usually overperformers, we're high achievers, but that leads into burnout, right? And so this idea of what does that mean, emotional intelligence? And I like to start with the why behind things, because I think when we understand the why, then we're more likely to take action to do things. And the fact is that emotions are the primary drivers of all of our physiological systems. They really drive not only the major body systems more than thoughts. The thoughts can trigger the emotions, but the emotions are what are in charge. And so they drive our physiology, including nervous system and hormonal activity, and they affect our engagement in life, right? So our motivation to do things. And when we have an understanding that when we know how to manage our state, which is managing our energy. I think of energy as two things: the state, which has to do with the emotion, and then also the story. Because the story is the thing that drives the state, right? The thoughts, the belief I have about this situation. If I wake up today and I think today is hard, I've already set myself up to be in an energy that it's going to be hard, right? And I've already set myself up probably if I'm waking up and, I work with lawyers all the time, and I woke up like this a lot of like, when you wake up, you're already in this angst kind of state of like, oh my God, there's so much to do. And is it going to go okay? Right. And really, what the study says as a result of that story is you automatically trigger the part of the nervous system that puts you in the fight or flight or freeze. So that literally in seconds puts in place 1,400 biochemical hormonal responses that happen in our system, just like that, right? And so when we are in that state, the brain literally is focused on a story of survival, right? It might be a survival today, but it's really the system that this reptilian response that we're having is very powerful. And the brain is using all of its resources just to be like, what's the threat here? Because that's what it's familiar with, right? And it might not be, I might just have a busy day and I might be worried about performing well at something, but in the brain and your body's response to it is like this really fight or flight, like I have to do something to survive this. And so what happens is when I'm talking about the brain's resources and what's happened, it's trying to just deal with that, is that we're not as powerful as we could be. We're not as engaged as we could be. But when I talk to law students, I talk to them about like, if you learn to manage your state and to manage your emotions, you're actually smarter because your brain has full access to the prefrontal cortex and to all of the executive functioning that we need to have as lawyers and the work that we're doing. But when we're in fight or flight, we don't have access to that. So the example of that is being, if you've ever been like, I can think about being in a courtroom and making an argument and coming out later and, 2 or 3 hours later when, you've sort of reset and you're not in the moment of the intense anxiety of that, of being like, oh, darn, I wish I had said that. Right. And all of a sudden,
we all do that, don't we? Yep.
Right. Or you're in a fight with someone, with your spouse and like, oh, I should have said that. Well, that's because in the moment, your brain was so intense, right? Focused in that fight or flight response that you didn't have access to the creativity, the part of that gives you that argument that you really, really needed to have. So when you learn to manage your state to be that you can manage those emotions and have the emotional intelligence to do that, then you have access to all of that. And so that makes us higher performing. And that's true for all of our team too. If we could not just teaching lawyers that, but teaching everyone on your team, because everybody's in that energy. We're all in this energy of, it's very adversarial, it's high pressure, it's usually tight deadlines, all of those things that are things that trigger in those kind of emotions, which can be anything from anxiety to impatience to anger to frustration. Then we're in that system where it's really draining on us. So, every day, if we think about ourselves as energy systems, that's why I say it's about energy management. Time management is important, but it's just a small piece of what's important for high performance. Energy management is this emotional intelligence, awareness of your state, awareness of the story, and knowing how to shift it, because we're going to go into that. We're human. We're meant to have, we're going to have these type of responses, but having the ability to recognize the what's happening in the environment that I have a choice in what the response is. So there's this moment when something happens out here in my environment, there's this moment that I have the ability, if I develop it, to actually choose what the response is instead of automatically being triggered into that fight or flight freeze state. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. When you take, it's like just taking that breath and having, instead of just immediately reacting. So to build that, do you look at your intention in the morning? Like instead of the moment you get up, you're letting your day get away from you.
Exactly.
You haven't even had your coffee yet and your day's gotten away from you. And that's just not true. That's in your head. So
Right.
starting with
Well,
intention.
yeah, that's a story. Yeah. So the intention part, that is why I say that with intention, anything is possible. But intention is really about awareness. So we have to start to build in and teach people awareness. And yeah, first thing in the morning is a great, but you even want to be thinking about, besides what the story is, how do I start this day in a way that's more empowering? So what we know is, because we're energy beings, we wake up every morning with a certain amount of energy. And that's a lot of factors. The amount of sleep I've had, the kind of food I've eaten, exercise, and then what's on have I been in a fight or flight state that I haven't reset from? Because when you stay in that state, it's very draining on our systems. It's draining of energy. And unfortunately, in our modern world, we're living in a fight or flight state, even if it's a low volume of that. So that's why I get frustrated driving to work, because of traffic. You're in a mild fight or flight state. You're in this anxiety state that is draining on your system. And because we stay in that all day long and we don't reset and we don't know how to reset, that's why we have burnout. That's why we have health problems. When I have lawyers that come to me and they're like, I'm just exhausted and I don't know how I'm going to get through. I'm like, yeah, and you're going to get sick, because it takes energy to fuel our immune system. And if we're in fight or flight, our body is using all of that to be in the fight or flight state. And it takes away the energy from the immune system, which is why when you say it for long term, you will see yourself get sick or have some kind of physical response that way. There's a statistic out there that says in the Western world, 80% of the people who are walking into a hospital are doing so because of a long-term chronic state of fight or flight, that this anxiety state that has then affected the immune system. And it's the underlying cause of a lot of our disorders, our physical disorders, that we have to have medical treatment for. This is very powerful when you think about that, because if we don't, as business owners, going back to, productivity equals profitability, one, besides having very engaged employees, that's higher productivity. If it's reducing the rate of sickness, so you're not having the cost of that. But when people stay in long-term disengagement, then you have higher turnover, which is so costly. It's, when favor happens, the cost to the business is just so great. You think you could handle it, but when you have a repeated of that, it's affecting your profitability. So what we want to think about is energy beings. Back to we wake up with a certain amount of energy. We want to think about what are the things that recharge and fuel our energy? And when we're in that state that's really draining, frustration, anger, anxiety, how do we shift out of it? It's both of those.
Right.
Like knowing it and recognizing it, recognizing that you have tools to switch out of that. And it's very important because if we're energy beings, then, if your battery's low, you're not going to be good at anything. As think about it,
Right.
it's just the same thing as your cell phone being an energy. You have to charge it at night to function well. The lower it gets, the worse it functions, right? Like all of a sudden it's doing weird things. It's the same thing with us. You think of it like that. Knowing what is to charge your own energy. So what we do is we teach with teams. We talk about high performing teams. There's a lot of science-backed research that is about performance in teams, and everything comes down to team coherency. And that's the term we would use, like the science kind of term of coherency for a team is based upon the individual coherency of a team member. So, each team member contributes to what the whole of the team is doing. So if one team member is off, it is affecting everybody, right? So we teach
Right.
awareness about that. When we train teams, we're like, every single one of you have the responsibility to show up as the best you. And when you're in a state that's not, you're affecting the coherency of everything else. And I use the example of like when you see really high performing teams, like, a really great football team, Super Bowl, when they are in the flow, you experience that as a spectator. It's like all that everybody's in scene moving. Another great example is thinking about seeing a symphony, in an orchestra
Yes.
where everything flows. You can teach your team to be like that. And it starts with teaching them this emotional intelligence, the awareness of where they are and how to shift that. So we start with some practices that people would term as like mindfulness practices, which it's true, right? Mindfulness is all about having awareness of what's happening right now. Would really this even doing a simple practice of just bringing in your five senses right now in this moment. Like, what am I seeing? What are the colors? What is the feeling of the temperature of the room on my skin? What am I hearing? Doing that practice is one that can help to shift you out of fight or flight, because to be in anxiety, we have to be thinking about something. There's a story that we have.
Right.
And I might be anxious. Maybe I'm anxious about talking with you today and telling a good story that your listeners can hear and follow. Well, if I'm in that, if I get out of that story, and then one of the techniques is just doing a mindfulness practice. Well, if I'm all of a sudden I'm thinking about what I'm seeing and feeling and hearing, that's a different story. And it's a way just to interrupt that pattern. So teaching some mindfulness practices, but then to just teaching like teaching leaders that what are the things that keep people really engaged. And as a leader, are you asking yourself questions like, where are my people? Are they really stressed? Are they overwhelmed? What are they feeling? And having discussions about that is really important, but then having the tools and techniques to help with that. So back to your morning practice. Morning practices are very important. I think the very first thing in the morning this one practice has changed my life on many levels, and there's all kind of science behind it, is just starting the morning with a gratitude practice. And so
Yes.
as soon as you become aware, I do it as soon as I'm like laying in my bed and I start to wake up, and I just start to think about, instead of, oh, what's on my plate today and having anxiety about it, I start to think about just three things I'm grateful for, right? And just doing that the first thing in the morning, setting your brain up for that. So there is a confirmation bias that the brain has. So if you start that practice every morning and that's the first thing that you set the intention for, and you're in gratitude, you cannot be in anxiety about the day and be in gratitude at the same time. So if you are in gratitude, then the brain has a confirmation bias that it says, oh, okay, this is where we are. And you can create a pattern of that. So we're story beings, right? We are,
Right.
as humans, we operate in stories, and gratitude is a story, but the brain is a pattern storage system and a pattern recognizer. So it is looking for something it's familiar with. So when you start to build practices, this is when I say to lawyers, you have to do empowering practices to empower your life and your law practice. But empowering practices means you have to practice them. And as you do, you start to create new neural pathways that then creates a pattern that the brain is familiar with. So I've done this for years and years and years. So my brain knows what the pattern of gratitude is. And when you do that, when you go into gratitude, science tells us that if I was doing biofeedback on my system, that when you do gratitude, your system becomes very coherent, including what they call heart rhythm variability, which is a predictor of all kinds of things, including resilience and health, etc. When you have very coherent heart rate variability, then you're higher performing. And literally, gratitude is one of the keys. If you just do a little bit of mindful breathing with a gratitude practice, you can almost instantly set yourself up into a higher performing state. And if you practice it every day, then it's easier for your system to go into it because the brain recognizes it. Just like any other or habit that you repeat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just thinking one of I've recently got back into journaling on a regular basis, and that's one of the prompts is gratitude.
Yeah.
So it just, and my team, we do wins journals for personal as well as business, and we all like to share that. And we start our team meetings with wins and
I love
gratitude. Just
Yeah. And there's science behind this. So what we know about gratitude is they've done studies that say if you do a regular gratitude practice just for 2 weeks, that you significantly will increase happiness levels. So a regular written gratitude practice, like when you're doing your journaling, has a lot of science behind it that says this really boosts people's happiness levels. If you're doing that, then you are higher performing because that has an effect on your physiology, the brain included. That means that you're in a better state to be able to handle anything that you go in to perform, right? And you're having higher engagement because you have a higher happiness motivation level in your life. So then you're more engaged, you're more productive. All of this feeds back into performance. So there is a science behind starting with wins with your groups. I say every time I start with a team, every time I meet with a team, we always start with wins. And the reason why is that is setting the energy of the meeting, starting with the win, sets a synergy of a group flow that it's positive, right? And
Right.
will help us to be in a state that as we tap into in that meeting of what challenges that we're looking at, because we've already set ourselves up to be more coherent, to be able to handle it. So there's science behind doing that with your team. So it's a very, very important practice. And, it's a check-in, right? But it's a positive check-in. It's looking at the story, how to win. I'm not asking you about, and even if you have a challenge, is what I say to my team or the teams that I work with. If it's a challenge, I want you to find in the challenge what the win is. Let's change the story of that. So maybe we failed at something. Maybe we tried something and it didn't work the way we thought, but we always can learn something to do it differently. And that makes it a more empowering story as opposed to, well, you didn't do this right. And this didn't, all the things that went wrong. You're looking at how do you turn that into a more empowering state, which means that it has to be a more empowering story. So if I look at failure as an opportunity to do it different, mistakes, real important on teams. Google did a study with like 200 teams. And the question is what makes high performing teams? What makes them so great? And they looked at things like, was it about intelligence level, education level? Was it people coming from the same cultures? Was it same interests? What are the things that make these teams perform well together? And it was actually the idea of two things. One, that people had the ability to emotionally intuit, meaning as team members, they had the ability to understand and reflect what was happening with them and other team members, even if it wasn't spoken, right? So this ability to have emotional intelligence of what was really the undergoing thing. The second thing is that everybody has an equal opportunity to offer something, right? So an equal voice. It's very especially for millennials. They really need to feel like they are involved in the work that's very meaningful. So they have to know for high performance, it's like we want to know what we do, how that contributes to the whole, right? So an opportunity to offer that, but here's the key. True high performing teams build a culture that team members feel that it's safe to be vulnerable, to offer ideas, to make mistakes, and not be ridiculed or embarrassed or harassed by leadership or team members. And if you can get that, and that's the secret. And unfortunately, a lot of us aren't building that. It's like the pressure of just naturally in work, people feel unsafe to make mistakes because they feel like they're going to get in trouble, they're going to get fired, all these consequences are going to happen. And really, that's about leadership. You got to turn that around because people are going to make mistakes. We're human.
Right.
Or we look at that as a learning opportunity and how do we do it differently? And that's about changing the story. And that can be very, very powerful.
And I think it's interesting whenever, like in law school, you learn how to be a lawyer, you don't necessarily learn how to be a manager or then a leader. And it's
Right.
being able to take those steps. And I have found having a coach was the thing that made a difference for me. So, just to leave that open, if you don't have a coach and you're thinking that you can do better, be better, have more, do more, maybe having a coach is the way to do that. At least
I
let
mean,
someone help you.
yes, we all are learning, right? I have coach after coach, right? And I am a coach, but I'm always looking for the next thing, the next level. What's the next thing that I can learn that I can turn around and help to teach other people? And we need that to, oftentimes we're in our patterns that we don't even see. So a coach helps you to see that. And a coach with a team is able to see the patterns with the team that you might not be understanding as a leader are very, very disempowering and are really affecting performance. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, if your team is not performing the way that you want it to, it has something to do with you as a leader, meaning that you may have the awareness that you need to understand what's going on. You have to ask yourself what you're modeling for your team. If I want a high performing team, I have to be a high performing individual, which means I have to be really aware of how I show up and managing my state and my story. Because again, team coherence is dependent upon individual coherence, not just the leader, but everybody. The leader is key. If I am an incoherent person, there will be incoherency in my team. There will be chaos. There will be inefficient management of energy. And that's really what coherency is about. And high performance about is management of energy.
Agree. Yeah, I agree. And it's like when my coach actually has this thing he says that I think is incredible. It says, you can't see the full picture when you're in the frame.
That's right.
So it's having someone to help you see where you're missing and how to get back in line and to grow, to become that productivity that you want.
Right.
And have a high performance team. So this has been excellent. I love diving into the emotional intelligence and how to get the energy in line with the teams. If any of our listeners wanted to reach out to you and, start with you or have a conversation, where can they reach you?
Yeah. So our website is mindoverlaw.com. We have a very big presence on Facebook under Lexlee Overton and on Instagram. And if any of your listeners come in and put, leadership and law, just in any of my comments on Instagram or Facebook, I'm going to know that it's coming from your audience, and I will reach out and give them access to a set of energy practices that I have put together that I think are the most powerful for helping you to have this emotional intelligence and the tools to be able to shift your state almost instantly. But when you start to do these, then you're building resilience. So if anybody's listening, just put in leadership and law in the comments on Facebook or Instagram, and we'd be happy to reach out and give that to them.
That's exciting. That's very exciting. I have all your links, so we'll make sure that those are in the show notes and people can reach out to you.
We'll put it in the too. That'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. This has been very exciting, and listening to you and learning more about the energy and how you work with teams, because we want to have a good business and grow together. And once you have those A players in place, you want to keep them.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me today for this episode. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, you can connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take the next step with a digital strategist to help you grow your law firm, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to lawmarketingzone.com to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, thanks for listening to Leadership in Law Podcast, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Leadership in Law Podcast. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of law firm owners out there facing similar challenges and striving for the same success. Head over to our website at lawmarketingzone.com. From there, connect with other listeners, access valuable resources, and stay up to date on the latest episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, keep leading with vision and keep growing your firm.